Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about The Drawing of the Three by Stephen King. So as usual, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, The Drawing of the Three is the second book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, and it is definitely the point where the story really gets going. So, we pick up almost immediately after the gunslinger, where Roland is still on the beach, but when he wakes up, he realizes he's sick. He has basically been out there in the wilderness for who knows how long, and he's developed a cold. But in his situation, this cold could be deadly. So, apart from that, he's also attacked by these things called lobstrosities that are just these really interesting, unique monsters that King creates and just adds in there, kind of apropos of nothing, and to the point like they're like giant lobsters. So Roland identifies them. They're monstrosities and they're lobsters, so they become lobstrosities. I just think that word is fun, also, but. Apart from that, Roland gets attacked by them, and his hand, he is unable to shoot the way he normally can, so he's severely weakened. He's in a much weaker position than we saw him in the Gunslinger. So he's really having a rough time of it when we get going in the story. But as he gets going down this beach, just basically starting to head down the path of the beam, that's what he wants to do. He comes across these three doors. There are three doors on the beach. One is labeled the Lady of Shadows, one is labeled the Prisoner, and one is labeled the Pusher. So the entire crux of this story is the gathering of the quartet. The quartet being a term that King created, meaning basically family born of destiny. So these are people that are born, that are destined to come together to help each other become basically better people and help accomplish a specific goal that they're all destined to be a part of. So Roland doesn't really know that, but it becomes, apparent later on. He kind of susses it out later on. But the really interesting stuff happens when Roland goes through these doors. That's where we really get the meat of the story. Because apart from that, that's basically the story. Roland's on the beach and he goes through three doors and he collects these people. But the interesting stuff happens is when we actually meet these people and go to their worlds. Because yes, this is where we truly introduce the multiverse. So each door is New York, but in a different time period. So the way Stephen King's multiverse works is that time counts as a different universe, basically. So the New York of 1987, where the prisoner is a different world than the New York of 1977, where Jake Chambers is, which is a different New York than the 1964 New York that Odetta Walker Holmes Susanna comes from. So it's really interesting the way King kind of plays with the multiverse and kind of gives you a little bit, because we only go through these doors just a little bit and kind of get a glimpse and then come back and stuff and kind of play back and forth a little bit. So King, this is just basically, I mean, in terms of a true like stepping your toe in, this is kind of jumping in. But for King, this is like just tapping a toe into the multiverse, because his stuff gets insanely convoluted and kind of acid trippy. So this is just basically a glimpse of what's to come. And I think this is done really well. Like, we all know Stephen King is really good with his characters. His characterization is really well done. These characters here, specifically Eddie and Susanna, they have the most full, complete story arc in a introduction setup that I think I've ever seen. Like, Eddie has an entire story arc just in this book, and it's like so much character development that you could basically extend it over the course of multiple books. And it makes perfect sense, though. Me having finished the series already, I understand that this development that he has in this book is perfect because it sets up who he needs to be in order to continue on this journey. So it just sets that up beautifully. And same thing with Odetta Walker Holmes Susanna Odetta, the Lady of Shadows. She someone with DID, dissociative identity disorder, caused by trauma at a young age and then magnified when she was attacked and lost her legs. So everything that we learned about her and the differences between the Odetta personality and the Detta personality is insane. It's the difference is so stark and it's so clear and it's complete. And she clearly has amnesia walls, so she doesn't know when the other is fronting, when the other is in possession of the body, basically. And it's just really interesting the way like these people are so different. Like, It's interesting. You can almost do a full character breakdown on her herself, because the nature of that personality that's split off is so different than the person who she is, and you can see where that person comes from. Though you can understand all the threads to it, and King was able to do that all in this one book without making it feel overstuffed or overcrowded or anything, and without taking away anything from Eddie's arc. I think also King decided to start off the multiverse with these different New Yorks of varying different times, because the way he plays with time in this also kind of has a major influence. So he kind of wants you to get used to this idea of New York of 77 is distinctly different than New York of 87 or New York of 64. And because this is the Dark Tower, we can already say that there are multiple connections. There are multiple connections to books that I haven't read, so I'm not going to go into great detail about them, because I don't consider myself an authority on it at all. So I just want to mention that, of course, this is the Dark Tower, so this is where those feelers start to go out. So this is where we start to touch on some other references to other books. So if you read them, you'll be able to pick them out. And as we continue down the series, I would definitely pick out and call out the ones that I definitely recommend or recognize. So before we jump over to spoilers, let me ask, and please do leave a comment to feed the YouTube algorithm. Which door would you all go through? If you could go through the door of New York City of 1977, 87, or 1964, which one would you go through? So let me know which door you would choose in the comments down below, and let's go ahead and jump over to spoilers. So spoilers for The Drawing of the Three by Stephen King. So in the beginning, when Roland is attacked by the lobstrosities and loses two fingers and basically has to be like is nerfed in terms of his ability to fight in terms of being a gunslinger, we then understand that he has to train Eddie. So Eddie becomes his like gun hand, he becomes a shooter. And when Roland is trying to help him out with a situation because he's smuggling heroin back to the US and it all goes wrong because he's working for some really shady people, he ends up in this intense gunfight, basically completely naked, and has to like shoot his way out and like deals with all this stuff. And it's a crazy epic scene, and it's really, really insane. It kind of works as proof to Roland that Eddie is capable of being a gunslinger. It's like he has that natural like flair for it, the knack for it or something, I guess. And it basically solidifies Roland's understanding that yes, he may be damaged and he's not as powerful as he was before, but the will of Ka, the basically the I'm trying not to make a Wheel of Time reference, but the universe itself will basically make sure that there's a way that they can continue, so that it basically gives him multiple apprentices. So something also interesting that I really like that happens with Detta Odetta is like when they set up the situation where they kill Jack Mort, the man who was responsible for Jake's original death and the loss of legs of Odetta Detta Walker Holmes, like her losing her legs. When she is basically when they kill him and she sees this, it forces these two personalities to confront each other. And when they try to like wipe each other out, they basically can't, and they fuse and become Susanna Dean, the more strong, more powerful version of both of them. They've basically, you know, taken all the best parts and none of the weaknesses of either, and become this awesome, galvanized, strong warrior woman who is basically in a natural, just a complete, who is a total natural gunslinger. Like she is just so ready for it. She's just already like later on it gets perfect. She's good. She's really, really good. And I really like this idea of her being in a wheelchair. So it's kind of like presented as a disability and stuff, but it rarely ever slows them down. Yes, it does become the chair itself becomes an inconvenience when they start to like traverse areas that's not, you know, smooth, you know, not a street and stuff, you know, cracked, destroyed, dystopian looking stuff. Like, so it becomes an inconvenience, but it's like never a hindrance for her, like even stairs and all this kind of stuff. Like, I love that it's not a detraction, it's not a weakness, it's not used like that. And I think I got to give King a lot of credit for that, especially at this time period in which he wrote it. A lot of these things could have been could have aged very poorly, really. Some of the language ages very poorly, but all of it could have like aged really, really terribly, and I'm really glad it didn't. And I love the way King kind of set up this twist. You kind of assume that each door is going to be a companion and it's straightforward. I assume the pusher would probably be Eddie because of the drug thing, because we had already been switching to SPOV. So I kind of assumed that. And then when we find out it's the guy that pushed Jake, then I was like, okay, like this is really cool. And then he started doing all this interesting stuff with time, because if you kill the guy that is responsible for Jake's death, then does the Jake from Gunslinger never have died and then doesn't help Roland up until the point of sacrifice in the Gunslinger, or is that a totally different Jake? But we know that's not the case because this Jake starts to get memories of that, and it creates this paradox issue. So I think that's really interesting just to start off. Basically, when you get into your multiverse bit, you start off with a paradox, and I'm like, of course King would, especially at this time in his life. But yeah, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here and say I really enjoyed this. Dark Tower is really awesome. There's so much to talk about, and there's just like, I don't want to make these videos insanely long, so I try to keep them kind of short. But I'll probably do a follow up and talk about the comic version because there's a lot of really interesting art and it's done really nicely in there. So make sure you subscribe to catch that on the channel. So make sure you hit the like button, and as I already said, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace.